Richard Nixon became president in 1969, making him the 37th president of the United States. Nixon was a U.S. representative and senator of California before becoming president. He studied at Duke University, then shortly he began practicing law. In 1942, he served in the Navy for 4 years, where he was lieutenant commander before resigning in 1946. After the Watergate scandal, he resigned in 1974, leaving Ford as the 38th president of the United States.
Before Nixon came into office, he wanted to make many laws and acts in the United States. Nixon's campaign strategy for winning votes in the South for the Republican Party was called the Southern Strategy. While dealing with the Cold War, the war in Vietnam, and riots and protests on the home front, Nixon also dealt with many domestic issues. Inflation and unemployment grew quickly, which is known as stagflation. President Nixon's main goal was to decrease the influence of the federal government. Nixon wanted to start many programs and acts, including the EPA. The EPA is an agency of the federal government which was created by the purpose of protecting human health by enforcing regulations based on laws that were passed by Congress. One law was the Clean Air Act. This act is a federal law that regulates air emissions from stationary and mobile sources.
Throughout Nixon's term in office, he was deeply involved in many foreign policies. In February 1972, Nixon went to Beijing to create peace between the People's Republics of China and the U.S. He also visited the Soviet Union in May and developed arms limitation treaties, along with signing the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. This decreased tension between the world's two superpowers. These actions of Nixon started a period of détente, which was Americans favoring a low profile in the world affairs. In 1973, Nixon signed the Paris Peace Accords, which ended U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. Along with ending the Vietnam War, he brought home many prisoners of war and established new relationships with the Middle East, which eliminated Soviet dominance within the Middle East. He supported Israel with massive aid in 1973, which benefited Israel massively. In 1973, he also started the Bureaus of Oceans and International Environments and Scientific Affairs. Sadly, due to the Watergate scandal and Saturday Night Massacre, the U.S. discovered illegal affairs occurring under Nixon's power, which led to Nixon resigning from his presidency.
During Nixon's time in office before his resignation after the Watergate scandal, he worked to create a more unified and peaceful United States. Nixon was able to improve foreign relations with China and the USSR, and was also able to end U.S. involvement in Vietnam. In the U.S., Nixon imposed wage and price controls and worked to further FDR's New Deal with the Environmental Protection Agency. All this was forgotten by the public after the Nixon administration's involvement with the Watergate scandal, which was a breach of security at the Democratic National Committee headquarters in Washington, D.C. After Nixon's involvement in this, he lost almost all U.S. public support and became the only U.S. president to resign.
Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
Mr. Vice President, are you prepared to take the oath of office as President of the United States?
I am, sir.
If you will raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute
that I will faithfully execute
the office of President of the United States
the office of President of the United States
and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend
the
Constitution of the United States.
the Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Gerald Ford was the 38th President of the United States. Ford studied at Yale University Law School. Before being part of the U.S. government, he served in the Navy during World War II. In 1948, Ford was elected into the House of Representatives for 25 years, representing Michigan, then was elected Vice President, followed by President in 1974.
The time Ford took office, the unemployment rate and inflation rate were so high. The president told citizens to cut back on their use of oil and gas to take other energy-saving measures. This plan didn't work very well. He cut government spending too. These actions triggered the worst economic recession in 40 years.
Once Ford took office, he inherited many of Nixon's foreign policies. Tension between the U.S. and Soviets increased after Nixon lent Israel aid. The Yom Kippur War in the Middle East almost led to massive superpower military involvement. Also, the American trade tied with the Soviets. There were multiple failures and successes in the American-Soviet relationship throughout the Ford years. In 1974, Soviets and the Americans signed the Vladivostok Accords, which provided a general outline for a successor treaty to Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. In 1975, Ford signed the Helsinki Accords between other European nations about European boundaries established after World War II. The Soviets did not support the Helsinki Accords due to the agreement of decreased forces. Issues between the Soviets and Americans occurred in Africa and China as well. These situations led to failure of détente. Soon Ford put Nixon's idea of aid for South Vietnam into action. Ford sent $700 million of aid to South Vietnam. Since Ford and Congress did not desire a reentry of American troops, the aid slowly cut off. South Vietnam was soon taken over by the Communists. In May 1975, the Mahagez cargo ship was under attack by Cambodians, but the U.S. defeated them. This defeat increased Ford's liking across the U.S. Since the CIA interfered largely with foreign affairs secretly, Ford had to reform the CIA.
The United States President Gerald Ford Jr. left a legacy behind that will never be forgotten. Most of his actions were directed towards keeping America together after the conflict caused by the Watergate scandal. For example, the programs he created, like the Whip Inflation Now program, helped to keep struggling America together by encouraging consumers to spend money in America and not outside the country. Ford was also pushing for educational equality as he enacted Education for All Handicapped Children Act of 1975, which meant that all children, no matter what handicap they had, must be educated. Furthermore, he signed the Helsinki Accords, which played a major role into bringing an end to the Cold War. In addition, Ford will be remembered for ending the United States' involvement in the Vietnam War by withdrawing after North Vietnam conquered the South. However, Ford's legacy was ultimately tarnished as he pardoned President Nixon for his involvement in the Watergate scandal.